Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Counselor Conference. We're happy to have everybody with us. My name is Kevin McMacken. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Regional Consortium. I'm very happy to have been asked to be your room host today. So I will be monitoring the chat. Just a few reminders before we get started. We ask that you please keep yourself muted. If you have questions, please enter those questions into the HUVA Q&A, and that will be in the window just to the right of your video. We will be uploading the breakout presentation materials and recording, and you'll have access to all of that after the conference. And after we conclude this morning, we would ask that you please click on the button Rate Session to give us your feedback so we can make improvements for our next conference. So with that, we will go ahead and turn the time over to Tina, who will be facilitating our presentation and our panel discussion today.
Great, thanks, Kevin. So today we're going to start off with a short presentation of the reports that the Centers of Excellence for Labor Market Research, my team, completed on resilient jobs and also resilient traits. And then we're going to go into a Q&A panel. We've done this type of talk before, and the most valuable part of the session is really hearing from the industry experts and the folks that would like to share their stories about what's going on with their current work environments considering the situation. So with that, if you've seen this presentation before, I appreciate you being here again. We released these reports earlier this year, and so this might not be the first time you're seeing this, but it's always good to have a refresh of our resilient jobs and resilient traits reports. So I'm going to share my screen now. And here we go. So as Kevin mentioned, my name is Tina Bartel, and I run the Center of Excellence for Labor Market Research here in the San Diego and Imperial counties. With me, we'll have our panelists, Carolina Bump, Christopher Alanias, and Cindy Morrow, and they'll be sharing their experiences during this time and how to be resilient as well. But again, first, I'm going to go through our reports. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Centers of Excellence, we basically study the job market and identify labor market trends to help the community colleges with program development and with strategic planning. Since I serve the San Diego-Imperial region, these are the 10 colleges in our region that our research specifically focuses on to help their programs as they respond to employers' workforce needs. As I previously mentioned, we released 2 very special reports this year. One is titled Resilient Jobs, and the other one is titled 21st Century Employability Skills, which you may be familiar with the term soft skills, but these are resilient skills that we found to be in demand over and over again every year that we talk to employers or whenever we look at online job postings. So first, I'm going to go through our Resilient Jobs report. So this report came about because a lot of colleges said, Tina, we need to know what to prioritize and where to direct our students during this difficult time. Well, as you know, the pandemic and the current situation has been very volatile. Sometimes we'll have stability and sometimes we won't. And so our report doesn't just look at the pandemic, but also a different time during where there was a financial economic downturn. And that period that we looked at was the Great Recession. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the Great Recession, according to literature, was between 2007 and 2009. And during that period, there was a financial crisis, the housing market crashed, and specifically for San Diego County, our total employment dropped by 6%. So we started off with 1.6 million, dropped down by 1.5 million during that period. The economic effects of the Great Recession spanned beyond 2009. So according to our report, I looked at this time period between 2007 and 2010. So I'm going to share with you some of those Great Recession numbers for a minute, but also in the other part of the report, we also look at the pandemic period. And at the time of the report release, we had data specifically for March through June. And so when we do update the report, we want to see how the data changes when we look at the pandemic at a longer period. But first, let's look at the Great Recession and what we found out. So our team analyzed over 800 occupational codes, meaning that there are over 800 different types of occupations in our system. Mind you that every company has a different job title for the occupation. So for example, I might be called a project manager, Kevin might be called a project manager number 1, Carolina might be called project manager lead. So every company has a different job title, but all of those are grouped into an occupational code. So imagine how many different types of jobs there are out there. But for the sake of the report, we looked at 800 occupational codes. Of those 800 occupational codes, we identified the jobs that did better than the 6% decline during the Great Recession, meaning that they either remained stable, grew, or had less than 6% decline between 2007 and 2010. Of those jobs, we identified the ones where employers were still hiring, so they still had demand for those jobs. And then of those jobs, we identified the ones where they paid a living wage at the median level. So at the median of all the jobs available, that you can expect to have a living wage for those jobs. Doing that, we found that there were 64 recession resilient jobs. And a lot of these jobs you'll find in health, life sciences, a lot of them in what we called ICT, or information and communication technologies, and some other jobs that are serving the public in general. So you can find that whole list of the 64 recession resilient jobs in Appendix A. Of those 64 recession resilient jobs, we found that 36 were also middle skill jobs. So as I mentioned earlier, my Center of Excellence for Labor Market Research serves the community college system. And in the community college system, we have programs called Career Technical Education. And a lot of those programs are serve occupations that have, where employers require more than a high school diploma, but less than a 4-year degree. So we label those types of jobs middle scale jobs. Therefore, that's why if you looked at all the recession resilient jobs and you narrow it down to only the jobs that had more than a high school diploma and less than a 4-year degree, you get 36 out of the 64 recession resilient jobs that are trainable by the community college system. So you'll be able to find that list of the recession resilient middle skill jobs on pages 5 and 6 of the report. I'll share the link to all of our reports at the end of the presentation, if you haven't seen it already. So the report will provide you with this appendix here, and you can go through those 64 jobs. If you click on any one of these links, it'll take you to a website called Own It Online, and it'll give you more information about what that job entails, including the description, as well as what types of tasks are expected of that job. For the interest of time, again, I want to make sure we focus on our panelists today. I'm not going to go through each of the jobs, but as I mentioned, we saw a lot from healthcare and life sciences, those ICT jobs, and a few business jobs that were resilient during the Great Recession. So that was the first half of the report, where we looked at recession resilient jobs. The second half of the report, we looked at the pandemic and the first few months in which we had data. So during this time, this is the criteria that we use to identify pandemic resilient jobs. First, the job had to make the top 50 jobs per month with the most online job postings. So of those 800 jobs or occupations that we have in our system, we identify the top 50 every month between March and June. So if the occupation made the top 50 jobs at least once during March, April, May, or June, then they were included in the report. So you can see how jobs became in demand over time. So this is the visualization of how that looks. This is alphabetized, so don't think of accountants and auditors as the top compared to the other ones as alphabetical order, but just looking at the first row to get an idea of how this methodology was done. So for example, accountants and auditors in the month of March made the top 50 jobs list. Again, that meant that of all the job postings, accountants and auditors was one of the top 50 jobs that had the most online job postings. In April, accountants and auditors also made the top 50 jobs list. And so you can see here that there was a total of 4 months in which accountants and auditors made the top 50 jobs list. And if you go through our report and Exhibit 4, you'll see that there are a lot of occupations here where they made the top 50 jobs list 4 times. If you go further down in that exhibit, you'll see that over time it staggers out. And you can kind of guess what's going on in San Diego County based on the jobs that are being posted for online and what's going on at a political level or legislative level. So for example, around June at that time, we started getting more waitresses and waiters posted in online job postings, also hotel, motel, and resort desk clerks. My assumption is these postings started going up online because that was around the time we were opening up a little bit. And so it's going to be interesting for us to see between March and December of this year how this pans out. Our team plans to release an update of this report, looking at over time how these top jobs went, and maybe we'll be able to find more as the data becomes available. So hang tight on that, but at least we have this report ready, so you have a first idea of what jobs seem to be resilient during this time. So this is a typo, this is pandemic resilient jobs, but of the pandemic resilient jobs, we found 800 occupations, 66 were pandemic resilient, and you can find them in Appendix B. So you see all of those pandemic resilient jobs. And again, my reports cater towards the middle skill market. So you'll find that there are 27 pandemic resilient middle skill jobs, also in Appendix B. So as I mentioned earlier in this discussion, one of the requests that I've had for this report was because we've been asked to prioritize during COVID-19 due to resource limitations, and they want to be able to market programs based on which ones were still in demand despite the recession or despite economic downturns. So what you have here is, I don't know why it's not clicking. Here we go. We did an overview of the recession resilient jobs and the pandemic resilient jobs. And of those, the one in the middle here, we found that there were 25 that were both recession resilient and pandemic resilient. So of all of the 800 occupations that we have in our system, 25 of them seem to be resilient during the Great Recession and during the pandemic. And you can find that on page 17 of our report, which is Exhibit 5. Of the 25 recession and pandemic resilient jobs, we found that 12 of them could be trained by the community college system. Again, we consider them as middle skill jobs, but you can find that on Exhibit 6 on page 18. So those are the key findings of our report. So as somebody who works for the community college system, this is very promising. We can target in which programs that we have that are resilient and start marketing them to different audiences and help students understand which programs lead to occupations that have been resilient despite an economic downturn. So that's the resilient jobs piece. Let's look at resilient traits. So as I mentioned, 21st century employability skills, or soft skills, has been around for a very long time. I've been doing labor market research for a little over 8 years, and over the past 8 years, I always hear the word soft skills whenever I speak with employers. When I ask an employer, what is the most difficult skill you find in new hires, they will always identify some kind of soft skill, whether it's communication skills or teamwork or critical thinking. Those soft skills come up in every single conversation. These same soft skills or 21st century employability skills also come up in online job postings. If you're not familiar with the term, they have a variety of different definitions. So I mentioned the first two, but a few others include baseline skills, essential skills, emotional intelligence, foundational skills, non-cognitive skills. So depending on the literature that you look at, there are a variety of ways to call these 21st century employability skills. At the end of the day, in the employer's mind, it's pretty much the similar types of skill set, they just have different naming schemes here. So we have an entire system where we looked at these soft skills in online job postings, and we identified that there were 25 21st century employability skills that were in demand in the United States and in San Diego. 25 seems to be a lot, so my team grouped them into 6 categories, which you'll see here. First, you have effective oral and written communication, and you can see the specific skills under that category. Then you have agility and adaptability, accessing and analyzing information, collaboration across networks, initiative and entrepreneurialism, critical thinking and problem solving. Year after year, the #1 skill out of all these 25 are the communication skills. So when we looked at all of the job postings in the US in 2019, 10 million, nearly 11 million of them stated that communication skills were necessary. and that includes oral and written communication, followed by customer service, teamwork, etc. On the right-hand side, you'll see that communication skills also made the top #1 soft skill in online job postings in San Diego County. We did a report like this for Imperial County as well. And if you look at our website, you'll see very similar graphics. Again, for the interest of time, I'm focusing on San Diego County. So of the top 10 soft skills, you'll see that the ones in bold overlap in both the nation and in San Diego County, meaning that if you're really going to focus on providing soft skills in your curriculum or trying to tell people what soft skills are, I would say that these top 9 are the ones you want to focus on. So work on your writing skills, your problem solving skills, organization skills, and so forth. One of the soft skills that is not here on this list, but was in our top 25, is the adaptability and flexibility that we keep hearing over and over again from employers during this time. As I mentioned earlier, the pandemic has caused a lot of variation in the labor market, a lot of unknowns in the economy. And so employers are really looking for workers who are flexible and adaptable despite all of these unknowns, and that they are self-driven or self-starters, and they are able to communicate despite this type of virtual environment that many of them are working in. A lot of employers are looking for people who can collaborate. And again, through a virtual environment, it might be very tough to develop teamwork and collaboration, but for those who can do that, those are the ones that employers are really valuing during this period. So the report lists all of these soft skills, and if you are trying to incorporate this in some kind of way in your work, but you don't know how to describe them, our report also provides the definitions for each of those 25 soft skills that I mentioned. All right, so those are my 15 minutes. And again, I wanted to make sure our panelists had plenty of time to share their experiences. But if you aren't familiar with our website, this is the link to all of our reports, and they will also be provided in Hoopla. All right, so let's go into our panel discussion. So here are our panelists, and one by one, each of them are going to introduce their name, their affiliation, and what is it that they do for their company. And I'm gonna stop my share now so you can see their beautiful faces. So Carolina, you wanna start first?
Sure, my name is actually Carolina, but that's okay. I'm Carolina Bupp. I work for Family Health Centers of San Diego. I am a volunteer and student services coordinator. I work with the recruitment team and in the HR department. And of course, we're a community clinic. Right now, just as you were talking, I wanted to look up how many positions we have available. And we have about 131 positions open. And they span everything from mental health care to just a patient services representative to even facilities. So we have our own in-house facilities department. We do everything. So that's what I do. I would mainly focus on student internships and volunteers that want to come work in the clinic.
Thank you so much. Christopher, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Sure, no problem. My name is Christopher Longus. So I work at Perspectium. So what we do is so we manage replication. So if a customer has something in one database, we kind of replicate it over to another database. So there's a lot of things involved in there. And what I do is I kind of work on the technical support end of it. So I work on if a customer has an issue, I kind of work on that. In addition to it's a smaller company, so I tend to fill a lot of hats and a lot of roles. So I do a lot of operations, DevOps, and a lot of other various functions in any given day since it's a smaller company. So I can say without a doubt, it's never a normal day at my job. So it's always moving around, doing different tasks, and making sure our technology works and our customers are happy for the most part.
Thank you so much. And then Cindy?
Yes, I'm Cindy Morrow. I'm still getting used to that name. It's only recently changed. I'm with Watkins Wellness. I've been there for about 5 years now. We are the global leader in the manufacturing of spas and aquatic fitness systems. So I know a lot of people have probably never heard of it. Watkins has been in California, in San Diego for 43 years at this point. So we've been around quite some time. We do have a lot of positions. We've been hiring through the pandemic. We did shut down for a while as a non-essential. But as soon as we opened up, we found that in the wellness and fitness area, sales have taken off. So if it wasn't for the shutdown, We have a banner year in sales, absolutely, but of course that gives us a huge backlog we're trying to catch up with. So keeping our manufacturing floor with the right amount of production workers. We've got engineering jobs opening up, maintenance, mechanics, technicians, you name it, we're probably looking for it. Marketing, sales, all of it. So, and what I do here is I'm the talent acquisition specialist. It's more of a strategic approach to recruiting. So it's really looking at not just finding people and putting them in there, it's finding the right people, making sure that they're a good fit for the company and that they're going to stay. So it's looking at that whole picture for the longevity of it.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for introducing yourselves. I'm going to share the question a little bit, and then I'm going to turn it off just so that the audience can see the question. And that way they'll be able to see your faces as you respond. So we're going to go in the reverse order. So then Cindy, you can start first with the question, but let me share the screen real quick. So our first question for our panelists is, how has your job changed as a result of COVID-19? What has been the easiest or most difficult change? And feel free to add a little bit about what you've seen with your colleagues as well, since I know that many of you work, the two of you work in acquisition and work with the broader company.
Okay, well, my job is now completely at home. I work from home. I would like to say it's difficult. I know it is for some people, but for me, I love it. I get more done. I can focus better. I don't have the drive-bys that I used to have at work. So what I mean by drive-bys are the people that show up at your door and have a fire they want you to put out right then. I don't get those as much. The difficult part, though, is you do have more distractions in Teams meetings popping up or Teams phone calls coming in, emails blowing up, and I have Skype too, so the messenger. Those can make it a little more difficult. And then the other problem is, I know for us on our floor, for those who are still on site with the social distancing, we now run 2 shifts. We never used to do that. We now have 2 shifts on production to keep up with our demand. So that's a little bit of a change for a lot of our employees who are not used to having to do a second shift, which is later. That one usually runs from about 3 to 11, and they're not used to doing that. So that was an adjustment. We did lose some production workers to that because they couldn't accommodate that schedule. So just keeping up with people, and for my job, because I do all the onboarding as well, I do the full cycle recruiting with the team, is getting that separated. There's people who start on site, people who start remotely. If you're starting on site, there's the COVID-19 training now. There's before you can even enter the building. And of course, it's changed the culture. So I have been back at the site a few times since then, and it used to be a very family almost feeling orientation there, and that's completely gone because of all of the distancing. So I think that's probably the hardest part, is really that social shadowing, or it's just not as full and as robust as it was. It's just all virtual pretty much. And it even feels that way in person anymore too.
Thank you for that. And Christopher, do you want to share your thoughts on how COVID has changed your position? What's been easy, what's been difficult?
Yeah, sure. So for me, so I always say that your duty stores still the same, but it's just the process that changes a little bit. So in terms of, I would say, we used to, for our group, for our department, we used to meet a lot of times, we used to have a lot of lunches together where we discuss, what's going on, how is it going, what are you kind of facing, what issues you have, some of those meetings have been moved to online. So we have a scrum, for those who don't know, typically a scrum meeting, we have, 15 minutes. We just talk about what we're kind of facing, what we need help on, what we're doing to solve it. So, we do those are virtual. Unfortunately, we've hired some more people, since then. So we haven't really, since the COVID, we haven't had really a chance to interact, really personally. I guess I call these the water cooler moments, where you talk about, we're talking at the lunch table or whatever about certain personal issues and things like that. It's more personally. So you do lose some of that interaction, but I would say for the most part, we still interact on the, online level, but, you do kind of lose some of that interpersonal connections a little bit. So, duties are still the same, just the process is a little bit different, how you go about certain things.
Yeah, so that creativity and that self-starting those skill sets really come in handy with your work.
Yeah, especially.
Awesome. So Carolina, and my apologies for mispronouncing your name, but how
Not a
has
problem.
your job shifted during this time, and what's been difficult or easy?
Well, I'm a little bit different than everybody else. I actually started my job during the pandemic. So I shift from one position to another one. I changed companies and have been with Family Health Centers now for 6 months. So I had to literally develop the entire volunteer and student services program from scratch during a pandemic. So it was an interesting change. So as many people that are looking for jobs right now, you have a lot of anxiety trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And yeah, COVID has definitely made you have to learn how to adapt quickly and be creative and be able to be flexible. All those things that you've mentioned in regards to being resilient are things that we look at now for even student interns to come in, to understand that things are going to change on a constant level, especially when you're working in allied healthcare as an allied healthcare provider. So those are middle skill jobs like a medical assistant position or anything like that. We are now looking for people that are able to adapt well, that can, come in, and if something changes really quickly, we need them to be able to do that. Bilingual is really important right now as well, being able to communicate directly, understand what the mission is. And my position, I've been able to create it to be virtual. So it did not, used to be in-person orientations. I do the same thing. I do the entire onboarding process. So it's from beginning to end, even with the volunteer and the students, and adapting to that, figuring out what tools you can use to make that happen. Like Cindy mentioned, learning Teams, learning Skype, learning Zoom, learning all these new skills in a very short amount of time. And that's for everybody across the board. It doesn't matter if you're just a patient services representative or a doctor. These are things that everybody now has to learn how to do. And like even interviewing, when we have people that come in to interview, you're not doing it in person anymore. This is how it's done, exactly how this conference is. You're sitting in a room by yourself, you have a screen in front of you, there's 15 managers in front of you asking you questions, and you have to pretend like they're in the same room as you. So those are the things that have definitely changed in what I tell my interns and students that they need to learn how to do. So any volunteers or anybody like that, I'm like, you guys have to understand that this is different, and you have to be able to interview virtually, because it's no longer in person. So things definitely have changed. I mean, I've had to learn how to adapt, learning a new job at the same time. So it's been quite interesting.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to pivot a little bit from our structured questions and ask you about the interview, because that seems to be something that a lot of folks are asking us now that it's becoming a virtual environment. So for example, in the community college system, the way it works now is that typically when you get interviewed, you get questions about 10 minutes before you walk into an interview session with the panelists. But now they will get it maybe 30 minutes before the actual virtual panel. And so one of the pros that some of the folks have told me is that they can write down some of their answers and have it there and on screen while they're speaking. So on our end, that's how it's shifted a little bit in interviewing personally versus virtually. What kind of advice would you give the folks that are trying to learn how to interview better in this virtual environment?
Cindy, do you want to take that since you've done a lot of this? I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute myself. Absolutely. Yes, it has changed. Everything is virtual. And I can tell you from a personal experience just a few days ago, having an interview candidate had a lot of noise in the background. So I would definitely say, make sure you're in a very quiet place. It can be very difficult to hear you otherwise. And it does make them seem a bit scattered. This person, I had even mentioned it to him, and it turned out he had interviewed with everyone else the same way. The other thing is we've never really done the panel interviews because they can be kind of confusing if they're not very structured, which I know in the colleges they tend to be. So we do ours are usually one-on-one, no more than 2 people at a time, which makes it easier in a virtual environment, because if you have 15 people in a virtual environment, it's much more difficult to read who's going to say what, when, like I said, or if you want to follow up on a question, you know, an answer that somebody gave and you want to follow up with a question, it can be difficult to jump right in and do that if there's too many people there. But I would say quiet room, you know, quiet place, even if it's outside, make sure it's very quiet. And I found outside really isn't. A lot of people say, well, I'm at the park, it's quiet. It's not. There are so many background noises there. It is not. Dress like it is an in-person interview. And I tell all of the candidates when I send them the invite, this is in place of what would be an on-site interview. So please dress and behave accordingly. You don't want to show up in your PJs just because you're at home. And yes, we've had people who have shown up very, very casual, which was very surprising to us. The other thing too is to make sure that your audio and your video work prior to the interview. And I always offer candidates the option of doing a test with me prior to their interviews to make sure they've got it all arranged. The other thing I've learned, and it's just an off one, we use Teams all the time. And so I always say you need to test it as a recruiter yourself first on what they have available. So we've learned that, for instance, business Teams for Business, even though they're at home, is a better option for them to download. If you're doing Teams interviews, it works better than the other one. There's, like I said, it's everything that you would do on site really applies still when you're doing a video interview. So you really do need to think about what you're saying. They're still looking for a thoughtful answer. They're still looking for you to look and act professionally. And you're so close up that there's really actually more tells and things that you can see and read in people. So you want to make sure that you're aware of how your facial expressions are coming across as well. So that would be my advice on that.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sorry for going off script, but it's just fascinating to me how everything is changing and how it works this way. All right, so going back to the script, it seems like most of you have shifted your job completely to remote work. But if some of it is not, do you mind sharing a little bit about if some of it has not been completely to remote work? And maybe share a little bit about what's going on with some of your colleagues if they've shifted completely or some or none of it to remote work. Let's start off with Carolina. Pause.
Most of my work is now remote. I'd say about 90% of it is now remote. I do go into the office and I do have some other activities that require my presence. So for example, we do a food pantry for our staff because of the food insufficiency issues a lot of people are having right now. So that's one of the projects that I have to manually physically be at and take care of. But most of my job can be done from home because I've made it that way. I've worked really hard at creating orientations and having everything done virtually. So even when I have 10 or 15 students that I have to do for a nursing program, I can do everything online. And I've worked with San Diego Nursing Consortium, so I can use their resources in order to make sure that our students are compliant. So it's figuring out the different the different procedures and tools that you can use to make it happen. So that is basically, yeah. So basically my job is now remote most of the time, which is interesting because I have a kid at home too. So that makes things a little bit juggling, I guess you could say. It's a lot of juggling that's happening right now.
Thank you so much. Christopher, do you mind sharing? Has your work completely shifted over to remote work? Or maybe some of it is also still in person?
Yeah, so I'd say about 90% of it is online now. So, we have shifted all of our, for my department, pretty much for all online. There is some part we have to go into the office. We do have some physical equipment, like some servers and stuff like that we do have to maintain. So there is some maintenance on site that we have to do. Those are things that we can't really ignore. So there's still some equipment there, and I've gone to occasionally to the office to grab a couple things that I need, some equipment, an extra monitor, some extra, another keyboard just to have it work. And so there's some things that you have to maintain at the office, but for the most part, I would say about 95% of it's all online pretty much now. And including all my other coworkers as well. They pretty much, most of them are all online as well.
And Cindy?
So for my position, it is definitely the majority of it is at home. I probably spend 99% of my work week at home. There are a few things I do have to go on site for. We do have a production team that is on site, and something that came out of the pandemic is it became very difficult to find workers at that level because they were actually making more to staying home at that time than coming into work. So we had started a program of conversions. So we convert our temporary employees to full-time employees after 90 days. So I'm in the office about once a month. We do the orientations on site and help them go through what we call the new hire tour, benefits enrollment, that kind of thing, because most of them are Spanish speakers and don't have a lot of technical skills or availability for computers. At work, all of our administrative people are working from home remotely. So all of our marketing, all of our accounting, all of our sales, and it's also changed where we're looking. So we are looking for engineers right now for R&D, and we are looking all over the country for them now. We aren't limiting it to you have to be in Vista and show up at the Vista offices or, in San Diego County anyways. We've got it now where you could be anywhere because we're doing it all remote. So it's a benefit, and I don't see it going away. I think companies are really starting to leverage the possibilities of having more remote work. So.
Could you share a little bit more about which occupations or jobs prior to the pandemic were primarily in person, but then now have been more successful at shifting to the remote work environment? So you just mentioned a little bit now.
Yeah, actually, all of our positions were on site prior to that, except for the sales positions, because we do have regional sales managers all over the world. Because we do have business in the UK and the EU, and as well as 2 plants in Mexico. So we do have a lot of people, but that has come to find, like I said, you can't do production from home. That one you're going to have to be there, and you need your mechanics and you need your technicians. But we found engineering is fine remote. Everything they're doing is on computers. Administrative positions, those are all doing really well remotely. Accounting, marketing, pretty much anything you can do. Even our executives are primarily working from home at this point. So if you do most of your job on a computer, there's really no reason why you can't do it at home. We have run into engagement problems, though. People really are not that engaged working from home. Some people really thrive on it. Other people, they don't do as well. They really need that connection. So it's right now, that's our biggest thing, is working on a lot of different ways to try and get people more engaged from home in groups. So we're developing different, if you will, get-togethers or events that they can join, and we'll have raffles. We've even on-site, same thing with social distancing. They feel very disconnected still as well. Like I said, it's a very foreign environment when you go there. It's nothing like it used to be.
I'm going to go a little bit off script, and this is open to anybody. So we are on Zooms probably 9 to 5. How do you deal with Zoom fatigue, or making sure that there's that boundary between work and life, work and personal life, because it's kind of merged together in this kind of environment? And feel free for anybody to chime in.
It's so funny you mentioned the Zoom fatigue. This was actually our last daily, we call them daily management meetings. So all of us in PSSG, which is People Strategy and Services Group, that's our HR. We're just talking about that, the Zoom fatigue, the concept of that. For me, I have had no problem. I have my own office. It's a complete workout room. I think you can see my weight machine behind there. I've got a traction board over here, which is a gravity board for stretching and that. But what I do is every morning I make sure I get up, I get ready for work, just like I always did, put on my makeup, and then I walk to work. So what I do is I take a walk in the neighborhood in the morning and then come in and go, grab my coffee, go to work. It just normalizes it. And the door remains shut to my office. If I'm in it, it's shut. If I'm out of it, it's shut. And that way it's not a constant reminder. And I think if you do implement things like that to keep it as close to normal as possible, it makes it a lot easier.
I agree with that. So I also have to do online trade of school for the little one as well. So it's a lot of having to figure out rooms available and how you can make your space work. So like today I'm in my bedroom because my daughter has school from 9 to 11 and she's in the other office with my husband. So what we've done is we've made it so that we like if I know I'm going to be at home, I don't have any Zoom calls available at that time so that I can work on my administrative job while she's in school so she can concentrate and I can be there because she's only 5. And then I can go back to like regularly scheduled Zoom meetings starting in the afternoon. So it's figuring out your balance, like you said, and making sure that it's still something that is an actual job that you're going to, and you're not just waking up and walking over to your computer and PJs. So there's going to be days that that might happen, but you still have to make sure that at least most of them you can make it that you're putting in your best effort. It's like anything, you have to really put in the work and be able to recognize that this is still a job and that you have to go and treat it that way. So that's what the funny thing is, because it's out, we work in community clinics, most of our jobs are still on site. So it has been very interesting for us because really nothing has changed. Like where you say that a lot has changed in your work environment, we still have a lot of administrative staff that have to come in because they're working in a clinic. So we can't have them work remotely because they have to check in patients. They still have to do all these things that are still having to be done in person. So we've actually had a lot more work to do now because of all the protocols in COVID-19, because of COVID-19. So our staff has had to work even harder to make sure that we are being safe, not only for our staff, but also for the patients that come in.
And I would say for our workplace, something we've been trying to do is be more efficient with our time. Before we, a lot of customers, they just want to have someone on call, even if the issue can be solved by simply, pressing one button. They're very consistent that they want call. They want someone on there with them to hold their hand, walk them through the process. So something we've been doing is, before we jump on the calls, we just want to make sure that we have everything before we jump on these calls, right? So we make sure we have all the information present before us to proceed on these calls. Because a lot of times what happens, and then, I can't speak on behalf of everyone else, but sometimes you get stuck on these things, where, let's just jump on it. Let's just jump on the call. Let's just go, solve it. Sometimes it's the right approach, but oftentimes, it's better just to get the questions ahead of time, understand the problem, and that's part of that problem solving aspect too, right? You just want to make sure you're understanding, you have the right information before you jump onto a call. So that's something we've been kind of doing, and internally too, right? Before we start having a company-wide meeting, we start saying, before we have this meeting, what do we need to address before we address it, before we go into this meeting, how can we use our time effectively, rather than just have, 3 meetings in a week, how can we have our meetings, be, let's say let's condense it to 10 minutes and where we're using our time effectively. So that's something, we've kind of developed over, we're still working on to improve it, just using your time effectively, during that certain window. And that's how we kind of changed a little bit more into the using our time effectively for whether it be Zoom or not to be zoomed out, I guess you could say.
Yeah, quick and efficient, right? The software.
Right. It's usually the best way to do it.
Well, speaking of which, a few of you mentioned, learning Microsoft Teams and other virtual environment software. So our next question is, what kind of training would you benefit from during this time? Again, we work for the community college system, or I do, and we want to know what is it that we can offer for folks so that way it'll make things easier to adapt to the situation. Any other trainings or software programs that you would benefit from?
Oh, I can speak a little. So it's more on the technical end. So, I can't speak on behalf of like the more software end, but on the technical end, just to know, we work in the cloud. That's a big part of our daily process. Learning, understanding how the cloud services are. I'm not expecting everyone on this call, to understand the ins and outs of it, but just understand the general flow of things, right? Understand like what AWS is and what you can offer. Just those basic tenets are kind of important. Because now, for companies, we're no longer moving, it's no longer the old structure where we have servers on site, someone's just taking out hard drives, putting them back in, there's still some of that, but, it's more now on the cloud, and a lot of those technologies are moving off site. They're moving more digital, so some of that understanding of how things work in general, those are helpful. and also some, some my technical, my field, some basic coding doesn't hurt as well. If you understand some basic coding, I'm not expecting everyone to understand, C++ and understand, Python in a day. That's not a realistic expectation, but just understand the basics of coding and there's some basic tenets, those I would say, help you between getting, it's a difference between, I would say, getting $40,000 and getting $100,000. I can tell you now it's a huge difference. And if you want to advance your career and if you want to keep moving, keep learning, those are technologies, and those are skill sets that, the earlier you learn them, the easier they are to apply them in whatever job you go into on the technical side. I know there's some other technologies I'm sure that, on other people use, but I would say, understanding some cloud structure, some basic business tenets, and just understanding how the flow of things go in terms of your business as well would help you a lot.
Christopher, have you had to remote into anybody's computers or anything like that?
No, thank goodness we let our customers manage their own systems. But what I do have to do on a daily basis, I do have to go into the command line every day and look at the servers, look at the logs. I can't tell you how many logs I've looked at in my lifetime these last 5 months or 6 months. And it's understanding, and the biggest part too, I would say, I mentioned this before too, but when you look at information, being able to understand what's relevant, what's not, right? Because today we live in a world where at any given day, someone can throw out 10,000 things of information to you, but being able to ascertain which ones are relevant to you and which ones are not, right? Because especially, when you're talking to someone, whether it be interview or whether it be, talking to a client or someone else, they're going to say a lot of things, but for you, it's going to be important to ascertain which ones are most relevant and which ones are most pertinent to what you're trying to do, right? So if you interview, you want to focus on what the company's trying to look for, right? Not just tell you, in addition to give you some of your experience, but to also be able to understand what experience is relevant to the position. And the same thing with the client, right? You want to make sure you understand the problem correctly and apply the right principles to fix it.
Yeah, I agree with Christopher. So this is Cindy again. Absolutely. There's not any specific software, and you probably couldn't train them with what they would really need. Again, it does come down to those soft skills, because you really can't be afraid to try new things. So it's more of an agent of new rather than change is how I look at it, because new sounds a little more positive, but looking at everything in a new way every day. How can it be better? How can it be managed, better? What can we do? So it's that whole continuous improvement mindset is very important. I am the site admin for all of our HRIS systems as well. So, because I do have a bit of a computer background, so I understand that technical end of it as well. But it's not any specific software, I would say, that they do. Because if you know how to operate Teams, Zoom's not going to be a challenge, and neither is, WebEx or NetMeeting or any of those others. They all operate basically the same. But what they do need to know is that they need to be curious enough to try and figure out the things they can do in it, play with it. Not, you're not going to mess anything up that bad, honestly. So just go out and try it. You can undo most of it. But talking about the remoting in, you asked about remoting into people's computers. Our IT team does that all the time. I have to coordinate with them because we ship the equipment to all of our new hires that are working remotely now. And we've hired this month, at the end of the month, I'll have hired 30 people already this month. We'd have to ship the equipment, and then I have to schedule on there for 2 hours in the morning for them to get all of their network accesses set up. Like you said, everything is cloud-based anymore, which is good actually. But understanding those processes, he's absolutely right, is probably the most important thing that they could learn. Then they know where to go and what to do.
And in regards for healthcare, right, because you have a lot of positions that are healthcare based, I would say the most important thing is for them to know that telehealth is the future. And if that is a class or anything that can be offered, that would be something I would highly recommend for any community college to make part of their program, because that is what's going to happen. I believe that it's not going away. I believe that that is how we're going to shift all of our appointments, and anything that has to do with primary care, it's no longer going to be you going in person. It's all going to be done virtually. So anybody that is going to be a medical office assistant, if you're going to be a medical assistant, any of those things has to understand the process and how to set it up and what information would be needed for the provider in order for them to be able to do their job accordingly. So I would say that that is going to be the biggest thing. And even in health information technology, like knowing the process as to how that's going to get done on the back end, because that is going to be what all EMRs are going to be based on, telehealth. So that is the future.
What about some of the soft skills training? So one thing that I've been trying to push a lot is communications training, especially since in a virtual environment, we're working with diverse teams. Now it looks like we're working with multinational teams, Cindy, multicultural, multi-generational teams. So that's one thing that I keep pushing, is that communication skills should be really trained. Is there any other type of soft skills or 21st century employability skills that we should really focus on?
Yeah, I can chime in a little bit on this. So I would say, again, for my field, critical thinking is important, because you're gonna be throwing a lot at you, and you have to be able to kind of think of things on the fly, and be able to kind of apply your fixes, some principles that you've learned, to be able to fix problems. So critical thinking, I would say, is very important. And then just being able to be flexible, and being not, I would say, I think Sydney had mentioned that too, is just not to be afraid of to learn new things, because there's gonna be a lot of things that are gonna be thrown at you, and it's okay to be overwhelmed. It's a natural part of the learning process, but there should not be a fear of learning it. That's why I can say, don't be afraid. When someone says, hey, I need you to automate a process, it shouldn't be, you shouldn't be afraid of it. You should be curious, saying, okay, I want to do it. How do I go about that? What's the process? What should I be looking at? What kind of guidance should I be looking for? Those type of things. It's important not to be afraid, and it's okay to be overwhelmed. It's, especially with communication skills too. Those are things you always work on. Trust me. I've had communication skills always, but it's always something you always improve on, because there's always a new situation that evolves. There's new social norms or whatever we follow too. So it's always changing. So as long as you can adapt and change to those things, and apply your thinking and be able to learn and overcome, those are most important, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with Christopher. I mean, I was going to say basically the same thing he did, a continuous improvement mindset. So you're always looking for new ways to do things better. The other thing, because I'd actually taken, is that love of learning. You have to actually have a love of learning, because you will be doing that for the rest of your life, like it or not, unless you're retired. And even then, you start taking classes. I think most people I know when they're retired do that. The other thing too is the technical skills. You really need to have those technical skills. Those can be taught, but that technical curiosity cannot. They have to get over that whole fear. I think a lot of people have it in their head that, especially with the computers and programming and that, it's like magic in the background. People like Christopher or Marlin, it's not. It's really not that complicated. They need to get over that fear. And then problem solving skills, which is the most important. So if you had a training perhaps that gives them a lot of different things that are coming at them at once. So prioritizing, learning how to prioritize what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and when it needs to be done, and being able to organize that all on your own is good. Communication's always number one, I think, anywhere, and becomes even more important virtually. Because if you can't step up, like Christopher was saying, asking for help, if you can't communicate that to the right people, then you're going to be more frustrated, and it's going to be harder, and it's going to take longer. So those things are all, really important, especially, like I said, now, even more so.
I have nothing to add, because they've both said everything that needs to happen. So it's flexibility, it is being adaptable to constant change, understanding the policies and procedures of the company, but knowing that those things are going to maybe be changed in like 2 to 3 months, but know that the safety protocols and everything that you need to do, but most importantly is customer service for my position and for anything that has to do with health, allied healthcare. Right now, a lot of people are scared and concerned, and so we have to be able to be transparent and honest with all of our patients and make them understand that we're here to help them out. So it's all about customer service right now.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. That's one of the top skills that we found as well, especially for health. Well, we only have a few minutes left, so going on to the next question, this one here. What advice do you have for students or job seekers who want to learn how to be resilient in general or in a career that's similar to yours? And I'll leave that open.
Be able to network, learn from others, join an organization that's focused on your career goals. Always ask questions and be willing to learn. That's my advice.
I would say, for technical fields, if there's something that you're interested in, I would say, there's a lot of free technologies out there that you can use today that you have that doesn't require any investment in terms of, cash or money or whatever. Take your time, take 30 minutes or an hour, whatever time you have allocated to learn the technologies that are facing the newest business, whether it be, look at the applications, go on Indeed, look at what technologies they're using, understand them. I would say, if there's a position that you're interested in, look at that technology, take an afternoon, take a weekend or whatever you have, whatever time you have available, learn it, learn how it works, learn this in terms of, and do some examples too. Cause then when we go in the interview, you can say, hey, I've used this technology, I've done this, I've done that, and I feel that, based on my knowledge, I feel that jumping into this role, I feel like I can excel, I can learn more and can exceed in that skill or in that job, and that's what I would say the most important thing is, if there's technology, if there's a job that's interested to you, look at the job, look at the technology that they're using or look at the structure that they're using and, be able to learn that maybe in the weekend or something. And then once you're ready to do that, just apply for it.
The only thing, and they both had hit pretty much everything I would say as well. The only thing I would add is organization. You have to be organized. If you're not, you're just not going to be as successful as you can be. And the other thing is really finding your passion in what you do. So if you're not passionate about what you do, then you're probably doing the wrong thing. But I do like to tell people, because some people say, well, my job really picked me. Your jobs really don't pick you. I mean, you end up where you are because you have you either have an intuition towards it, that's where your skill set is, or something along that line that was developed that really did bring you there. So maybe you just lost what gave you passion about it. So I think it's good to reassess yourself frequently and think about where you're at and more importantly, where you want to be. And then you can draw that line and really get the details hammered out on that one, which is the best way to get anywhere. So like I said, organization is very key to it.
And I would add to that too, if there's I know there's a lot of folks out there who have a job right now, but it's not very fulfilling. And, and I do know from time to time, there are some opportunities, where there are projects, that, it's kind of an open, it's kind of open to everyone. I would advise people, if there's a project, that they're looking for volunteers, and if it interests you, jump on it. There's a lot of opportunities in your life companies that you don't see it very visually, but if you just talk to the person in charge of it, saying, hey, I'm interested in this, I'm kind of want to learn more about it. A lot of times, they'll accept the help. And if there's something, you're interested inside your company that they're doing is, I would offer that, to volunteer and to try it. Worst case scenario, if you don't like it, obviously make sure you finish the project in some kind of state. And then, you say, okay, I've tried this. I know what it's like, I've tried here, now I know it's kind of not for me. There's a lot of opportunities inside your companies too, wherever you work too. It's just those opportunities, when they come along, take them.
I want to say thanks to Chris for mentioning that, because I would say that that's a lot of what I work with. A lot of people reach out to me that are interested in working in healthcare and have never done it before. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we can't open up those opportunities for a lot of people, but yes, try to figure out if you can volunteer somewhere. Like if you don't need an internship hours, but you want to volunteer and learn about something, always reach out. It's the easiest thing to do. The answer you're going to get is a no, but at least you tried, right? Like it doesn't really matter if you at least go, hey, I'm really interested in this. Is there anything I can do to learn more about it? They might let you join in on a meeting. They might let you hear about a project that's going on, but at least you are opening yourself up and networking. So I think that that's really important right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I just was thinking too, we call them stretch assignments. So it's the same thing where I work, is you have the opportunity to work with other departments in other things. So I was on what we call the Continuous Improvement Steering Committee for office staff, and I was working with all of the administrative people within all of the departments, just trying to come up with ways to improve all of the processes and save money in that. So a lot comes out of it, but it was a great assignment. I learned a lot, absolutely loved it. So there's always those kind of opportunities, even within your own organization as well, if you look for them.
Well, that's awesome, everyone. Thank you so much for your advice and explaining to our counselors and our students how to be resilient during this time. As you know, our counselor conference theme this year is counseling for career resilience. I think you all covered that very well. And thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I know during this time, it feels like we're in Zoom all the time, but it can also feel very isolating since we're at home by ourselves and we don't have that water cooler talk, as you mentioned, Christopher. So I want to thank all our panelists for coming today and sharing all of your knowledge. That was so helpful and so engaging. Thank you so much for the discussion. I think we have a background clap. Kevin, our room moderator, are there any last things that you would like for us to do before we wrap up?
No, I just wanted to extend my gratitude to the panelists as well, and to you, Tina, and just remind everyone to make sure that you click on the survey at the end to provide us your feedback. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
you
you
for having us. I really enjoyed it. All right,
Bye.
Bye.